Hello, this is Skull D, and this is going to be my 40 subscriber special. So, a couple things is, first of all, face reveal, big excitement. Hello, handy dandy. So, the second thing I wanted to point out is that I am not doing my bronze armor video right yet. That is something I am still researching and getting in the process of, and I just need to make sure that I have all of that information correct before I start doing it. That being said, I need to start uploading content, so what we're going to be doing today is looking inside of the Dungeon Master's Manual that is not the 5.5e demon, and we're going to kind of look at things that I like to or know about them. So I'm going to talk about how I would use them in a game, why I would use them, and if I know anything mythologically about them, I'm going to throw that out there. This is kind of going to be a random test if I even know it. So, the first one we're going to go with is... So, the Galeb Dhur. Interesting little creature here. So, these bad boys, and I'm pretty sure I can get a picture in here, they are essentially known as these little monsters, a type of elemental, and they like to guard the earth and do all that. So what the official guide says is that the Galeb Dhur is a boulder-like creature with stumpy appendages that act as arms and legs, and has the ability to animate the rocks and boulders around it, and thus usually encountered in rocky terrain. Powerful magic allows a spellcaster to summon a Galeb Dhur from the plane of Earth. Some Galeb Dhur also form naturally in places touched by that plane. The Galeb Dhur is imbued with greater intelligence than most elementals, allowing it to be better assess the threats and to communicate with creatures entering its guarded area. Stone Guardian. A Galeb Dhur doesn't age or require sustenance, making it an excellent sentinel. A powerful druid might charge a Galeb Dhur with protecting a stone circle or sacred hilltop. Another Galeb Dhur might be created to guard an underground tomb of a wizard's tower. When it chooses to, the Galeb Dhur can make itself look like an ordinary boulder, remaining perfectly still for years at a time. A Galeb Dhur is permanently bound to the material plane so that when it dies, it doesn't return to the plane of the earth. It has an excellent memory and is more than happy to share the information regarding its environment with creatures that it doesn't regard as threats. So stopping right there in the book, I want to just go ahead and say that these guys are an excellent form of elemental if you don't want to go the route of golem. I know that for a lot of new DMs, myself included, the idea of a golem is really cool. You can make them out of just about anything. And I would really argue that a Gale or a Golem Dhur is kind of the same idea as a golem, but a little more intelligent and able to talk to you. I think that in the same way that we could make a druid like a furbolg that protects the forest, we could add a Galeb Dhur as kind of like this whole trope where it's like the machine outside of nature, but this one has learned to grow with it. I kind of feel like that's what these guys are meant to do. So, outside of just being a stone guardian, they have the stone connection. A Galeb Dhur can become one with the earth around it, allowing it to imbue nearby rocks and boulders with a semblance of life. The Galeb Dhur uses its animated boulders to frighten away interlopers and defend whatever it has charged to protect. When it needs to move close to those intruders, it presses its limbs tight to its body and rolls forward at a furious pace. Now that is a really interesting way to add something to your dungeon that you might not necessarily have. Now, I don't know mythologically where these guys come from. I don't actually think they do, but here, let me give it a quick Google. I said I wouldn't, but now I am interested. Galeb Dhur, let's go with mythology. No, they don't seem to really come from anything in that way, but I can definitely see where they have their roots from the elemental tree, and I think that in itself is a really interesting concept. So, outside of just keep saying it's interesting, how do we use it? Well, I think that they make a really good boss concept in a D&D game, but not because they're overly powerful. You see, they have an armor class of 16, they usually have about 85 HP, and they have a speed of 15. 30 feet when rolling, and 60 feet when rolling downhill. We'll get to that. That's a really neat little function in itself. But how do we use them? So, as a boss, they are able to animate boulders and stones around them. I would guess this is to a limited degree, but that means that they have some kind of ability to create traps that are unusual to the type around them. Imagine if you're in like a stone cutout inside of a mountain, and all of a sudden, certain stones just fly out and start attacking you. Kind of like a bat creature, but it's just literal stone with damage resistance, and it's basically you're fighting thrown stones that are just keep coming back at you. For a low-level adventurer, that's going to be quite a bit. Now, also, putting a low-level adventuring party against a challenge rating 6 creature is kind of a lot. Their strongest stats are their strength and their constitution. So you're going to be dealing with a lot of damage. Like, it's going to soak up a lot of the things that you put towards it. Especially where it has resistances to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, and from non-magical attacks. Now, that doesn't mean that you can make the party fight it dead on. I think that where the Galeb Dhur excels is also where you can do well against it. So it has the ability to do this thing called a rolling charge. We'll get to the false appearance in a moment because I think rolling charge is the coolest aspect about them. Rolling charge allows them to essentially just throw themselves at their enemy in a ball form. Think like the Ben 10 alien that's kind of like the armadillo. And if you think about it, this could operate a lot like the flaming sphere. And if you kind of listen to where I'm going to go with this, I think you'll like it. If you take a Galeb Dhur and you roll it through oil, and it were to ignite on fire, is it not now a flaming sphere that can animate and roll itself around more willingly? It has an intelligence of 11. It's going to be able to do the same actions as a human being, if not just a little bit better. I mean, it's not going to be any tactician, but it's going to have the idea to roll around and to attack things. Now, if the Galeb Dhur rolls at least 20 feet straight forward towards the target and then hits it with a slam attack on the same turn, the target takes an extra 7 2d6 bludgeoning damage. If the target is a creature, it must succeed on a DC 16 strength check or be knocked prone. Now, all I'm saying is that you can animate stone and stuff like that, and you can roll people prone. So all I'm saying is that you could knock something prone and then kind of use rock tomb on it to keep it down. And I think that that's a really interesting way of restraining your players, because remember, the Galeb Dhur does not want to really do anything besides protect its surroundings. So this is a creature that could get away with just knocking your party out and not necessarily trying to kill it, especially if it's under orders of something like a druid. Maybe the druid doesn't want to kill everyone that comes near it because that's just going to attract more attention. But to restrain the party and knock it down using its own traps and its rolling body, that's pretty good. Especially when we get into its next ability, which is the false appearance. So while the Galeb Dhur remains motionless, it is indistinguishable from a normal boulder. I would argue you could make that something more like like a rock wall or something like that. If a Galeb Dhur is just standing in a hallway, how are you going to notice if it's anything past the hallway? If it's standing completely motionless, you might just think that's a small wall. You go past it, all of a sudden it starts rolling towards you, and you have a nice little Indiana chase scene. Now, it does have the ability to animate boulders once per day, which is very neat. I would argue that you should be able to make that any kind of rock or anything like that. But honestly, for what it is, the Galeb Dhur is a really interesting creature. Now, it does speak Terran, so it would be able to speak with certain party members, so you could even create a quest line around these creatures. Now, I'm a huge fan of taking monsters and using them in a way that we wouldn't necessarily if you haven't caught by my skeletons video or by my goblins video. I like taking things in a realistic sense, but also moving it in a more, like, they're more complex than just smashy attacky. Like, I like smashy attacky monsters, I like Godzilla, I like dinosaurs, but at the same time, we don't need to do these things where we make them smashy and attacky for no reason. So, for instance, a Galeb Dhur might be smashy attacky because it perceives you as a threat, but it also might not. It does specifically say things it doesn't regard as a threat, it's more than willing to communicate with. So, maybe, just maybe, if the party's good enough and there's enough, natural, nature loving people, you could get away with having your Galeb Dhur end boss be willing to be persuaded out of it. And how much fun would it be to have then gotten a rolling boy that is a Galeb Dhur on your side? So, and if we want to talk about treasure, I think that this is a great way for the druids and the rangers in the party to really get something out of it because they're going to be protecting something natural. I don't always think this needs to be a treasure like a wand or a painting or some kind of artifact. I think these things would protect creatures that are sleeping. They, like, honestly, if there's like a green dragon or a brown dragon, something that is particularly malevolent that would be found in a forest that would need to be dealt with quickly, I think druids would probably summon Galeb Dhur to keep cultists and other organizations away from trying to then poke the dragon's nest or even get near its hoard. Vice versa, maybe they're used as old elvish guards and things like that, like an automaton guard from, Skyrim style, except instead of metal, they're the stone Galeb Guardians. Either way, I think it's an interesting concept, and I'm going to move on to the second creature, because we're going to have multiple. So, we have the Deep Gnome, because I've already done goblins, so I'm not going to touch them. So, Deep Gnomes are, admittedly, not one of my favorite races. I don't dislike them, but I've never really played as them. I've never really played with a campaign with them. Baldur's Gate 3 is kind of the extent, and I feel bad for them and what they deal with, but I don't like Drugar that much more because of them. So, the Gnome from the Deep, also known as the Svernbeln, or Svernbelin, I apologize, I'm terrible with that. Deep gnomes, or that name I'm terrible with, live far below the world's surface in twisting warrens and sculpted caverns. They survive by virtue of their stealth and cleverness and tenacity. Their gray skin allows them to blend in with surrounding stonework. They are also surprisingly heavy and strong for their size. An average adult weighs around 100 to 120 pounds and stands 3 feet tall. A typical Deep Gnome, I'm really not good with that word, enclave contains several hundred Deep Gnomes and is strongly fortified. Secret tunnels lead to and from the settlement, and the Deep Gnomes use these as evacuation routes when the enclave comes under attack. Other than my little brain fart there, they are essentially one of the they're a pretty good Underdark city. I think when it comes to species, the drow and the goblins get a lot of the mainline look in media, especially dwarves as well, because they are the go-to, they mine into mountains. But I think deep gnomes have a really interesting lore dynamic behind them because of that, because deep gnomes are really, really not what you would expect. Like, gnomes are usually taken as these, like, either it's a garden gnome or, oh, it's like a smurf, when gnomes are terrifying, man. Like, if you look at D&D and you go through any of the lore with these bad boys, they're freaking scary. They have the ability to shrink things, to grow things, to make artillery. They're smart, they're persuasive, they're pretty dang cool. I need to make a gnome video overall. So, they do have established gender roles. Male gnomes are bald, white, while females have stringy gray hair. Traditionally, females run the enclaves, while males scour the outskirts in search of enemies and deposits of precious gemstones. It's pretty cool that they are run by women. It's also pretty cool that they have a warrior culture. I think that personally, as all things go, they should be a little switched in between. I'm all for the feminarchy. Don't get me wrong. I don't want the rage of that young lady. However, I am for both sides fighting for all of the fries. The gemstone harvesters, they cherish fine gemstones, especially rubies, which they harvest from mines deep in the Underdark. The hunt for gems often brings them into conflict with beholders, drow, kuatoa, drugar, and mind flayers. Of all their natural enemies, deep gnomes fear and despise the murderous, demon-worshipping drow the most. Now, this is part of why I dislike the deep gnomes. Yes, they do worship Lolth. I guess you could consider that a demon. And yes, they do come into conflict with them. But I have a problem with racial discrimination of any kind, and I think these two races could work together a lot better than they could fighting each other. That being said, I'm not a particular fan of the drow either, because the drow are funky for a whole other bunch of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get to one day. And finally, Earth Friends. Deep gnomes are often encountered in the company of creatures from the elemental plane of Earth. Some can summon such creatures, especially Zorn, enticed to service with the promise of gems to feed on. I find that to be the weirdest aspect of deep gnomes. So most societies collect gems and other currency because they want to have this idea of wealth, and that's a construct that I understand that most societies want because shiny pretty things can pay for non-shiny pretty things. The problem I have is that where'd they learn to summon things from the earth elementals? Like, that they interact with beholders, drow, kuatoa, drugar, and mind flayers as enemies. So who do they interact with that has access to the earth plane? Because I am a big fan of planar magic. I think that the planes are super cool, and there are gateways that lead from, it's kind of like pinholes from the material plane into them. I should make a video one time, but honestly I think there are larger YouTubers that have done it better. But the earth plane, from what I understand, is kind of wild. It's like full of primordial creatures and things that I don't understand why gems would be the primary thing they eat, but it's really cool that they do, and it's really cool that they can do that. It's just I wish that we could see more of that, because from what I've seen, nobody ever really does that with them. So, like, I'm almost thinking like Marvel's Mole Man with this, where it's like all of a sudden a deep gnome pops up with a bunch of creatures that are like Fing Fang Foom and all this, and I just don't see it half the time. So please do more of that, because if you're going to play deep gnomes, that is the thing that I think needs to be done more. It'd be super interesting. So, getting outside the lore, these guys are much more feasible to be in your game. They're a half a CR. I think every game could run them, because the more of them, the better. That's how I see them. But when you build a whole society of deep gnomes with all these earth creatures, like, what are they going to be doing? Are they purely mining for rubies, or are they trying to vet themselves in a new landscape and a new warren? Who were they fighting against? Particularly, I think that beholders is a really interesting in for them. Like, beholders are something every party wants to fight. They are something that is iconic. Just look at Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Like, 1 second, I think I have the book right here. Yeah, like, look at this big guy. This is a beholder, if you don't know what it is. Not that, that's a goldfish. But that's a beholder, and goddamn, is this the coolest fucking monster in D&D. I don't care that I'm swearing. So, big beholder fan, by the way. So, if you want to fight these things, if you want to work with them, deep gnomes are a natural thing to be working with them on. They also collect rubies and shinies and things. They collect a lot of other things, so there's your in for them. With that in mind, they are definitely more intelligent and Stealth-wise, they have stone camouflage that allows them to have an advantage on dexterity stealth checks made to hide in rocky terrain, and gnome cunning. The gnome has advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws against magic. Massive benefits, by the way, for a player that wants to choose these. Like, honestly, deep gnomes go super unnoticed in a lot of game formats because, well, you want to make the strongest, coolest character, right? Well, try a stealth build that can go into cover really easily. It's really cool, especially if you can get something going with a ranged weapon or any kind of magic, which does lead to innate spellcasting. They have the ability, with an intelligence spell save of DC 11, to cast spells such as at will, non-detection, on self only, and once a day, blindness or deafness, blur, and disguise self. I'm not going to go over how important sensory overload options are. Like, if you've played any kind of Baldur's Gate or D&D game, any kind of RPG in general, you know the power of blinding an opponent or deafening them. But the ability to cast blur is just broken. Blur is overpowered. It's great. Early on, like, you want to win, cast blur. It's great. Typically they use things such as war picks and poison darts, which immediately you're dealing with an opponent at early game potentially that uses poison. That's going to be major. Poison is an overpowered thing if you know how to use it. I personally play it with a bit of a homebrew system. I don't like poison as it stands because I think poison should be like, for a minute, you take X amount of damage per turn. I don't like, and in a minute you take 6 damage. I could be reading that wrong, not gonna lie. But I like it where it's like, in a minute you take X damage per turn and call it good. Outside of that, I mean, these guys are great at investigation, perception, and stealth. They have dark vision and passive perception. They can speak Gnomish and Terran and Undercommon, and they are just interesting little creatures. AC of 15, probably going to use a lot of cover, probably going to use a lot of group tactics and artillery and all kinds of fun crap. And I think that you could almost play them together with a Galeb Dhur, and I promise I didn't plan for that. So let's go over the third and final creature we're going to do. Oh boy, it is the Kraken, a 2-pager. So, Krakens are a sea creature, and I really wish my wife was here to talk about this because my wife loves sea creatures, and she's going to love that this got added in. So, Kraken is said to be: beneath the waves, the Kraken sleeps for untold ages, awaiting some fell sign or calling. Land-born, mortals who sail the open sea forget the reasons their ancestors dreaded the ocean, even as the races of the deep ignore strange gaps in their histories, when their civilizations nearly vanished after the appearance of the tentacled horror. Leviathans of legend. At the beginning of time, Krakens served as fierce warriors of the gods. When the gods' wars ended, the Krakens shrugged free of their servitude, never again to be bound by other beings. Whole nations quake in fear when the Kraken emerges from its dark dements, and even in the middle of the deepest oceans, storms rise or abate according to its will. The Kraken is a primeval force that obliterates the greatest achievements of civilization as if they were castles in the sand. Its devastating attacks can destroy an ocean, trade, and halt communication between coastal cities. An ominous darkness presages the Kraken's attack, and a cloud of inky poison colors the water around it. Galleons and warships vanish when its tentacles uncoil from the deep, and the Kraken breaks their masts like kindling before drawing down ships and crew. Not even landlocked surface dwellers are safe from water, and some crawl up rivers to nest in freshwater lakes, destroying cities and towns along the way. Adventurers tell of these monsters layering in the ruins of lakeside citadels, their tentacles twinned around leaning towers and disintegrating stone. These are one of the coolest creatures before I continue. I love krakens. They're a Greek mythological creature. They could predate that. We don't know. They are one of the preeminent forces that we believe belongs to the giant or colossal squid that people misinterpreted. It is very likely that these did at one point exist without getting into conspiratorial things, not during our time, but they most certainly could have existed during prehistoric time as a form of giant cephalopod that would very much fight other creatures. And they make me very excited, because one thing I love is a sea campaign. And during those sea campaigns, what better than the introduction of a Kraken? I think Pirates of the Caribbean did it best when they have that giant Kraken scene. I have not seen too many movies do it outside of, like, Attack of the Titans. So, oh man, do I love them. They are definitely a cool creature. And, to continue, mortal foes. Some krakens are virtual gods, with cults and minions spread across sea and land. Others are allied with Ulfildra, the evil princess of elemental water, and use her cultists to enforce their will on land and sea. A kraken's pleased with its worshippers can be calm rough seas and bring a bounteous harvest of fish to the faithful. However, the devious mind of a kraken is ancient beyond reckoning, and is ultimately bent to the ruination of all things. That plays into how we can use them. I think a kraken has the same power as Cthulhu or a ancient god or an aboleth or any of these forces. They just don't usually get played as such. People usually just, whoop, there's a kraken, it's got tentacles around, fight them off, oh, they're fought off, now we're going back. No, no, no. You go to a port city and there's a cult. Maybe they're deep gnomes, and they worship a kraken. But they don't call it that. They think it's a water god. They think it's great. And all that fluctuating light, by the way, is because this is natural light and it's midday. Haha, 6:26. It's actually nighttime almost. So, the Kraken is a creature that, in its cult-like state, they don't even see it as evil. They're just trying to becalm the sea. They send out sacrificial vessels. They go underwater. They have all this cool stuff. And it's all to keep the weather cool. Because as soon as they stop this worship, and as soon as the party stops the evil cult that they suspect is a problem, the weather patterns go out, tentacles drop out of the sea, and we get into the next part of needing to go into the Kraken's lair. A Kraken lives in deep depths, usually a sunken rift or a cavern filled with detritus treasure and wrecked ships. You can have all kinds of different things. I'm not going to read the lair actions, but it can move strong currents. The water in the lair can become electrically charged, which we'll come back to that. And it can have regional effects, such as affecting water elementals and really just messing with the weather. In all ways, it is essentially the tentacled version of Storm from X-Men. If it wanted to cause a hurricane, I'm pretty sure a Leviathan of certain size could do that. Now, what I find really interesting about these creatures is the electrically charged lair. I love bioelectricity. It is a cool thing that eels can do. I do not know why a creature of this size can do it. It can cause lightning storms. It can cause ink clouds. It can fling things. It can bite things. It says nothing about creating electricity itself, but it can magically create lightning bolts. So what I have to assume is that it can create traps that use those charges over time, or it just becomes aware of you and just electrifies the entire thing. It is one of the aspects of the Kraken in D&D I don't think gets brought up enough. Now, this is a challenge rating 23 creature. This is not for the faint of hearts. I think this is an entire campaign setting in itself, not a creature you just throw at someone. It is immune to lightning, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical attacks. It's immune to frightened and paralysis. It's a pain in the bum to fight. And it will wreck you very quickly on a ship. It will wreck you very quickly at sea. I think that the best way to use one is, while it is chaotic evil, there is that aspect where there is a cult that is trying to appease them. Maybe you work with a group of people trying to get out of that cult. Maybe that cult works with you. Maybe you work against it, and that creates the Leviathan coming forward. Either way, it is one of the more interesting end boss creatures. And now I'm going to take all three of these creatures that I've covered, and we're going to create a little setting. So, you come across an underwater ocean in your travels. On both sides, there are two coastal cities. You've got one city controlled by the Drow, and one city controlled by the Deep Gnomes. The Deep Gnomes have began worship of a strange creature. It is headless, it is faceless. And yet, they claim that it keeps the waters calmed. Strangely enough, though you're below ground, there are storms here. There's no sky, but storm clouds emerge. And you've never quite understood why. And the Deep Gnomes say that this is entirely because you need to appease their god. The god controls the storms, the god controls the waters. So every once in a while, they go out, and the Drow and the Gnomes have these ceremonial wars together. They're not friends by any extent. It's a way of taking care of political issues, but they will have these large naval galleon battles. And at the end of it, the ships that sink are used to appease this god. Because at the bottom of this underground oceanic trench lies a primordial leviathan who is raising its young to travel out to the greater ocean. Now, there are records of this, but they are all protected in various libraries inside of the Deep Gnome City. And those are protected by an ancient force of rock elemental guardians, which have been ensued that while the cult of the Kraken utilizes water and electricity magic, this is meant to be the power of stone, what the original Deep Gnomes were able to come into contact with and befriend. And so, through the Deep Gnomes' connection with the Earth Elemental Plane, they were able to get an army of Galeb Dhur guardians to ensure the protection of the knowledge of the Kraken through these temples that now the water cultists seek to interdevelop. Your party's goal is to find that information and to figure out a way to slay the Kraken or to appease it. Have fun, folks. Now, to end this off, because I feel like I'm going to do this quickly because I'm trying to do it in one take, I just want to say thank you guys so much, and I have a sponsor. Not quite, but it's myself. I'm going to officially talk about my tabletop RPG that I'm creating called New Doggerland. It is possibly the thing that causes me outside of work to not write YouTube the most, outside of gaming and everything else. New Doggerland is a World War I alternate history tabletop game that I have put about 250 pages into so far, and it includes the idea that a New Dogger Bay has been drained by oceanic dams and desalination plants, and from it rose the country of New Doggerland. From this marshy, muddy plain, they have sought to create a new land, but in doing so have landlocked Germany. Now, the Germans seek to break out towards the sea. After 30 years of development, All hell has broken loose as the Allied powers attempt to help their new nation of New Doggerland, a land of immigrants, a land of colonists, a land of opportunity, in defending themselves against the German attacks and those nations that ally with them. This setting is a diesel punk, ocean punk setting that features everything from walkers and airships down to battle tanks and some other really cool things. I hope to have things like power assisted armor and everything along with that. Now, my inspirations are things like D&D, Company of Heroes, Warhammer 40k, and I am looking to produce this independently. I have been, again, writing this for about 2 years. I have nothing but concept lore notes and all that out, so this is more of just an advertisement of it exists and is a thing I'm going to be doing. So if you want to know more about that, I am going to include a little sneak peek at some of the vehicles in the description, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. Like, comment, and subscribe if you do. And honestly, thank you so much to the 40 people that have subscribed to me. This has been a bit of a wacky concept, but I'm really hoping I can get more out of that. If you are coming to just see me and look at my content, this is the face reveal. This is a dumb transgender person too gay to function. But at that point, we are doing fine, we are having fun, and I really am happy to be doing this. Hopefully my Bronze Age armor video will be out sooner than later, but honestly, it's been a phase. There's a lot to it. So, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.